I missed my daughter's 9th birthday because I had to go to New York City for a pitch I was hired to produce. I told myself it was temporary, that Manhattan would still be there next year, but a client that size might not. My dad was never around for my birthday, so I swore I'd never miss them for my kids, and here I was repeating the crime. I watched her blow out candles over FaceTime from a tiny, overpriced hotel room near Times Square, while a siren wailed outside my window, mocking me as I tried to hear the party I was missing. The next day, when the pitch wrapped early, I walked past FAO Schwartz on Fifth Avenue and saw a line curling around the block. The sign in the window said everything must go. By the time I got in, the place looked gutted already. Shelves picked clean, parents moving like looters after a riot, but I was determined to get her something unique and expensive to make up for my absence. My daughter loves otters. They've been her favorite animal since she was 4 and saw one crack open a clam on Animal Planet. She used to call them water puppies, and she used to draw them all the time when she was little. I got her a sketchbook for Christmas, and it's full of otters because she started drawing again. And they're all wearing scarves, eating spaghetti, and riding bikes. So when I saw that last plush otter on a wire rack near the back wall, I snatched it up immediately before another dad had a chance to redeem himself first. It was soft, realistic looking in a cute way, and waited to add that extra layer of belief to it. Brown fur, glass eyes, a stitched mouth that curved ever so slightly. It was beautifully made. I pressed it to my chest in the checkout line, testing out the hug vibe of the otter, and it passed with flying colors. After that, I felt like I had scored a major win for my daughter. When I gave it to her, she lit up in a way that forgave me faster than I may have deserved. She hugged me tight and then hugged the otter even tighter. My wife made her pose with the otter and took a bunch of pictures on her phone, while my son rolled his eyes and made a gagging sound in that snotty way 11-year-old boys do when something feels too sentimental for them. Later that night, I asked my daughter what she was going to name the otter. "She already has a name, Daddy. It's Ophelia," she said from the hallway. Such an old-world name wasn't what I was expecting to hear from her. I leaned against the doorframe and asked where she got that name from. "That's her name, silly," she said, and she giggled like I was the one being slow. "She told me." I laughed and played along. My daughter has always liked assigning voices to everything from chicken nuggets to her entire toy box. At the time, I thought it was nothing, and went downstairs to unload the dishwasher. Looking back on it, maybe I should have seen the warning sign right there, because everything changed from that day forward. The next day, she snapped at her brother over a bowl of cereal, slamming her spoon down, and milk splashed everywhere across the table. She'd always been a patient child, especially with my son, who teased her every chance she got. She swore at him, then stared at him with a steady frown that made my wife pause mid-coffee sip. We chalked it up to mood swings from being hangry, but reprimanded her for cursing. 9 is a strange age, right about the time hormones begin their quiet shuffle for little girls. But later that week, her behavior escalated. Her teacher called my wife about a fight that happened at school. A boy teased her friend at recess, and she launched herself at him and used a karate move she told the teacher she learned while watching her brother practice martial arts. She left a bruise under his eye and blood on his lip. The principal said she looked calm afterward and showed no remorse for what she had done, refusing to apologize even after the boy apologized to her. At dinner, one night shortly after that, my son reached across the table for another French fry. She watched his hand pass near Ophelia, who sat upright on the chair beside her. My daughter grabbed her fork and drove it into his hand viciously. He screamed as the fork clattered to the floor. Blood pooled along his knuckle from 4 little holes and dripped onto the floor. She sat there breathing heavily, staring at him with hatred in her eyes. Then she said, "She told me he was going to hurt her." We bandaged his hand and sent her to her room. She cried and clutched the otter and whispered into its fur while my wife helped my son put ice on his swelling hand. After everyone went to bed, my wife told me she heard something through the bedroom wall earlier that day, before the fork stabbing incident. She said she heard our daughter talking to the otter, but her voice sounded different, like she really was talking to someone who was much older, an adult. She said something about sacrifice, my wife said quietly, about making her alive again. I laughed a brittle sound, unnerved by the report, but tried to just write it off as normal things kids pick up from school or on YouTube. They play pretend, and sometimes they don't always know what they're saying. But I was now on alert, and made it a point to pay attention to her behavior and instantly began noticing odd details. She carried Ophelia everywhere with her, even smuggling her to school in her backpack. She sat her at the table, buckled her in the car, and while she was drawing on her bed, she had lined her up facing the door like a guard dog. She carried on full conversations with Ophelia too, but they were becoming much more secretive. I listened by her door as she spoke to the otter in murmurs that trailed into pauses, as if listening for replies, then answering those replies. The only thing I clearly heard her say was, "I'm not scared. I can do that." The day after, I came home early from work. I noticed the garage door was cracked open and didn't remember leaving it that way. Before I went in the house, I went to go shut it. As I walked towards it, I heard this high-pitched meowing, a thin sound that made me think I was about to catch our cat Jester chasing a mouse. But when I lifted up the garage door, what I saw made the hair on my arms stand up. Our cat was tied to a folding chair with a jump rope. A kitchen knife lay on the workbench beside a roll of paper towels. My daughter stood in the center of the concrete floor. Ophelia tucked under one arm, staring at the ground. Creepy symbols of circles and intersecting lines covered the floor in red marker. Underneath the chair my cat was tied to was a crude spiral with points branching off like veins. She looked up at me and calmly said, "She needs something, Daddy, and only Jester can give it to her." I had to do all I could not to panic, but I sternly told her this was not okay. I told her to go in the house, but she refused to leave until I yelled at her to go in the house. She ran inside, and I untied the cat and brought him into the house with me. Jester was trembling, and so was I. This is how serial killers start off, I thought to myself as I approached my wife at the stove stirring sauce, unaware of the geometry forming in our garage. My wife stormed off after my daughter after I told her what happened and took the otter from her hands. That's when she erupted into a tantrum the likes of I had never seen before from any child, let alone my own. She screamed so hard her voice broke as she knocked over everything in her way, threw all of her stuff on the floor and at the wall. Then she punched the wall in her room until her knuckle bled. That's when I took the otter outside and locked it in the trunk of my car. She finally calmed down and tired herself out. It was an exhausting night, and I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the horrible scene from the garage in my mind over and over. The next morning, when I got up to go to work, there she was, with Ophelia in her arms. The trunk had been closed, the car locked. There was no way I wouldn't have heard her go outside and unlock the car because the horn on the alarm would have woken me up. My wife suggested a child psychiatrist she knew of that we could take her to. I agreed because logic needed to enter the room, so I took the day off and was able to get her in to see the doctor that day. The psychiatrist met with me in the room. He asked gentle questions and nodded a lot. She then talked to him alone, and I sat in the waiting room for them. She appears stable, he told me. What she's going through is normal. It sounds a lot like her acting out is attached to perceived abandonment. The toy is a focal point. Remove it, then reintroduce it as a reward for appropriate behavior. I thanked him and took her home. She said nothing in the car. That night, we sat on her bed and explained the plan. She listened without emotion, staring straight ahead. Ophelia told me you'd do this. If you take her, she said softly, she's going to kill you. There was no anger in her voice, only uncertainty. The way she looked at me scared me more than the screaming ever had. After she fell asleep, I went downstairs and searched for the symbols I saw in the garage that had burned themselves into my mind. After trying all sorts of searches and coming up empty, I started looking into occult forums and subreddits. That's when I found something very close to what she drew. They resembled old druidic markings tied to possession rites, a ritual meant to bind a spirit to an object using blood and an organ of some kind. I told myself it was nonsense and kept reading onward until I had enough and my brain was burnt out. That night, I went to bed with a weight in my chest, nervous about what I had read and was perplexed as to how she knew how to draw those symbols. Around 2 a.m, I heard a thud and thought it was the cat, but then another followed and I suspected something else was afoot. I stepped into the hallway and noticed that a light glowed from under my son's bedroom door. I opened his door, and to my shock, he laid tied to his bed with belts and rope, a sock stuffed into his mouth and taped. He looked up, eyes bulging when he saw me, and a muffled scream emitted from his gagged mouth. A symbol had been drawn across his chest in something that looked like blood that I dared not venture where it came from at the moment, addressing the situation at hand first and foremost. At the foot of his bed, my daughter knelt. Ophelia was propped upright beside her. She held a knife in both hands and chanted words in a voice I could not recognize in a language I did not understand. I grabbed the knife from her hand, and then I grabbed that goddamned otter. I ripped the gag out of my son's mouth, and he started screaming. She bellowed out a piercing yell, then lunged at my legs, but I pushed her back and ran into the hallway. I passed my wife, who was frantically running to my son's room. In the kitchen, I slammed the otter onto the counter and drove a knife through its stitched belly. Stuffing spilled out in clumps as I tore at it. I dragged the knife upward to make a bigger hole when something heavy thudded against the blade. I carried it directly under a light and reached inside, and from the cavity I removed a small object wrapped in twine and embedded with crystals. It looked like a heart, shrunken, dehydrated, and dark. It was hard as stone, and the smell of it assaulted my nose to the point where I gagged. My hands shook, and I dropped it into the sink. After gaining my composure, I got a paper bag from the grocery store and threw the otter and that cursed organ inside of it. I carried it to the backyard and tossed the bag into the fire pit and doused it with lighter fluid. The fire wafted up quickly, then settled as the bag burned away and the stuffed animal began to reveal itself. The heart caught fire in a strange blue flame. The color shimmered, reminding me of the flame of a propane grill, but this blue was much deeper. The crystals popped and cracked, and a smell rose that made me gag. My wife stood on the porch screaming my name while our daughter convulsed on the kitchen floor. Inside the house, she arched her back and screamed as if the heart I found in the otter was being pulled from her chest. The convulsions lasted only a few minutes, but it seemed like an eternity as we both watched in horror. We called 911, and the EMTs said it looked like a seizure. They took her to the hospital and ran scans and tests on her, asked us about family history, then stabilized her. They found nothing. When she woke, she asked for juice and complained about the hospital blanket. She looked tired, but like herself again, with a smile and a look in her eye that was present, that hadn't been there in a long time. From that day forward, she returned to the girl we knew. She remembered very little of her time with the otter, but had been told what she had done. Later, she apologized to her brother and even the boy at school without anyone prompting it. I drove back to Manhattan 2 months later for another meeting. FAO Schwartz had finally closed, officially, and the windows were covered in brown paper. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at my reflection in the glass, wondering how a thing like that could have been in that store. Who put it there? Was it someone at the factory who made it? Someone who worked at the store? Was there more of them? These are questions I will never have answers to, but my only hope is that no one else suffers the same fate as we did. My family is dead, and everyone thinks I killed them. But it was the Jester, I swear. I didn't hurt anyone. He did. He tricked me. It was all just a joke. A bad joke. I'm getting out tomorrow. 10 years in juvie. They say I've made progress, that I've accepted responsibility. But they're wrong. Because I didn't kill my family. I was the victim, preyed upon by that toy, that evil thing, the Jester. It all started with a garage sale. My mom loved them. Every weekend was a hunt. Me and her, driving around, digging through other people's junk while she called it treasure. I always hated it, and the kids at school tortured me over it. You haven't lived until you've worn some rich kid's cast-off Abercrombie hoodie, and that someone happens to be in your class. Getting laughed at was the story of my life. Then I found him, the Jester. I couldn't believe it when I saw him. There he was, sitting at the edge of a busted toy bin like he was waiting for someone. Waiting for me. This was a genuine Jester figure, straight from the 70s Mego line. Not a knockoff, not a reissue. This was the real thing, straight from the comic books. I lifted him up like I just unearthed buried treasure. Known as the Trickster of Terror, the Jester wasn't just the coolest villain in the universe, he was the craziest and most dangerous. Sure, the costume had a few faint stains, and a thin layer of dust clung to his head like a film of time, but the sculpt, the joints, the paint, they were all intact. A little yellow, but his crooked grin, that infamous, nefarious smirk, and those wild, psychotic eyes, they were still perfect. Shiny, too, but as I looked closer, they were kind of glossed over like wet marbles. Gave me the chills a little bit, but it was like they were watching me, like they'd been waiting for someone to notice. And there he was, the Jester. Part horror show, part stand-up act, all nightmare, and now all mine. I didn't even ask my mom to buy it, I just walked over clutching him to my chest like a prize. But the lady running the sale noticed. She looked up from holding baby clothes and froze. I swear the color drained from her face. "That thing?" she said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You can take it. Just take it." I opened my mouth to say thanks, but she was already walking back into her house. Mom was annoyed. "Jay," I said, "no more dolls," giving the Jester a sideways look as we buckled in. "He's not a doll," I muttered. "He's an action figure." My mom couldn't ever tell the difference, and so at this point I just stopped arguing with her, because the ride home was quiet, and I held the Jester in my lap the whole way, tracing the stitching on his tiny costume, brushing specks of dust off his hat. His face was frozen in a half laugh, half snarl, like he just heard the punchline of a joke he wasn't supposed to tell. That night, I put him on my shelf, but he didn't belong there. He was something else. I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at him in the dark. His eyes caught the moonlight like tiny orbs of glass. I was almost asleep when I heard a laugh, then a whisper, so soft it slid under the door of my brain without knocking. "You want to hear a joke?" "What?" I said aloud. "You want to hear a joke?" My eyes snapped open. My heart hammered in my chest as I sat up in bed, thinking it was Zach, my brother, messing with me again. "Who's there?" I whispered, barely breathing. "Your brother," the voice said. It had a rasp to it, like it was scraped from inside a throat too dry to speak. "He's gonna have a bad fall on the stairs tomorrow. Real funny, ain't it?" I didn't move. I stared across the room. The Jester hadn't moved either, but he was facing me now. I was sure I'd left him looking out the window. I closed my eyes. Then I heard him cackle again. The next morning, I couldn't stop staring at Zach at breakfast. He slurped his cereal, then flicked a spoonful of milk at me across the table, teasing me as usual and calling me Garbage Pail J when Mom wasn't listening. My heart thudded like a hammer in my ears. I kept waiting, and I kept hearing that cackle in my mind. And then it happened. Zach ran up the stairs to get his backpack like he always did. He took the steps 2 at a time, but this time, he slipped. I can still hear the crack of his neck when he landed at my feet, a broken corpse. I screamed, Mom screamed. She thought it was an accident. So did the cops, so did everybody. But I knew. The Jester told me he did it. He did it for me, he said, but I never wanted my brother dead, just to leave me alone. That night, I put the Jester inside my closet and buried him under some clothes. I could hear the voices of people downstairs and my mother's sobs. My brother was gone, and I felt I was to blame for it all. That damn Jester. And like clockwork, when I thought of him, of it, I knew it was thinking of me too, watching me, so I sat up. And there he was, sitting on the shelf. I glared at the Jester with hate burning into him, but he seemed to feed off of my grief over my brother, and his smile widened before my eyes. His teeth looked sharper, his eyes glistened, hungrier in the moonlight. Then he jumped at me and yelled "boo" as he disappeared into the darkness of my room. I reeled back and turned away, teeth clenched, eyes closed. I was frozen with dread. I heard the pitter-patter of his little feet across the floor, and then that maniacal laugh came again. This time, it was right next to me. "You want to hear another joke?" I didn't answer. "Why did the cheater cross the road?" I whispered. "Why?" "To get his throat slit!" Then a vision played in my head. Dad was next. The Jester was in my head and I couldn't get him out. My brain hurt. I clutched my ears as I lost consciousness. The next thing I remember is a bright streetlight crackling. And when I look up, I realize I'm walking. I stop, and I'm standing on the corner of Church and Johnson Street near Donna's house. Dad didn't live with us anymore after Mom caught him with Donna, her best friend. So there I was, next to his parked car when he visited her. It was late. The Jester made me wait in the bushes, holding him up so he could see. But in his hand now was a plastic knife that hadn't been there before. When Dad came out with Donna, holding her hand like he used to hold Mom's, I couldn't watch. The Jester stepped out of the shadows, flailing the hunting knife Dad had given me for my birthday 2 years ago. I could see the attack in their shadows, and I heard the slashing of meat, the splattering of blood. and then the collapsing of corpses. The Jester laughed and laughed and laughed. Then the figure was back in my hand. 2 bodies at my feet. I shook with fear, and warm piss trickled down my leg. I threw him to the ground and ran home. I smelled like a ripe urinal at the county fair, and the blood made my feet sticky. After a shower to clean myself off, I jumped into bed, but I couldn't sleep, replaying the horrific events of the night in my mind. The next morning, there he was. The Jester was back on my shelf, sitting upright, looking out, his smile even bigger now, mocking my terror. I couldn't take it anymore. I sprung at him and I tried to rip his head off, but he wouldn't break. I tried to burn him, but he wouldn't burn. I couldn't get rid of this little demon. And though he was preying on my family, his juiciest victim was me. He said he was my friend, my protector, but he was destroying my life. So I waited, and soon the garbage trucks came. And when they did, I went outside. And right before they got to our house, I threw him in the trash. I watched the truck gobble him up and drive away. Finally, I felt at peace. I felt he was gone. And for 2 days, he was. But as sure as the sun will rise, he was back on my shelf when I woke up on Wednesday morning. He giggled and said he wasn't mad at me for being a little wimp. He asked me if I missed him. Then he told me that best jokes always come in 3s.
You want to hear another joke?
I turned away and buried my head in my pillow. No, not again, I thought. There was only one person left, and she was all I had, and I loved my mom.
This one's the best joke yet. The grand friggin' finale.
I cried. I begged him to stop, but he just grinned.
What do you get when you mix Xanax, vodka, and a pack of Marlboro Lights?
No. I kept saying it over and over.
A pile of ash with your name on it.
He jumped off the shelf, and I slid down under the covers. That's all I remember, until I was at the staircase watching. The fire spread faster than I thought. I ran outside as Mom's bedroom was ablaze. I stood in the driveway, holding him, watching the house burn, listening to her scream, listening to him shriek with delight. His face, familiar and terrifying. I threw him into the fire, and when it was over, I was alone. They found me 2 days later, hiding in a drainage pipe across the street from the house where the garage sale was, that place where my nightmare began. I was waiting for her, the woman, because she knew, and that's why she gave him to me. She cursed me with the Jester. She knew all about him. I told the police the whole story about the Jester and the evil afflicted upon me by that woman and her damned garage sale. They questioned her about it all, and she swore she never even gave me a toy. The Jester never moved from her bin. There it was, as she and the officer looked down in her garage. But I know what happened, and I'm not crazy. I know what I saw, what I heard. I know what he did to them, to me. And that woman is to blame. Maybe she's some kind of witch or something. She must be. But that Jester, that's not all. Because with every death, he changed. Just a little. A knife here, a freckle that matched Mom's there, a chipped tooth like Zach's, a plastic chin just like my dad's. But by the end, when I threw him into the fire, that face, it was mine. The Jester looked just like me. And that's the part that still keeps me up at night. When I close my eyes, I see him. I see me grinning. And that was 10 years ago. And tomorrow, I walk free. They say I'm better, that I'm rehabilitated. Okay. But you know, the hardest part is when it's quiet. Because sometimes I can still hear him laugh. And then,
you want to hear a joke?
now I just don't answer. Because over the last 10 years, I've written a lot. of my own jokes.
Horror.
You're listening to Nerd Horror Stories, a twice-weekly horror anthology series. No commentary, no long intros, just stories. Stories to fall asleep to, stories to keep you awake, and stories that feel close to home. Please subscribe